Hi everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the first week of Data 1 at Columbia Journalism School. I will be your host, Susan McGregor. In these introductory videos, we are going to kind of explore some of our initial topics for the course, which is going to focus on data formats. These are going to focus on data formats, data access, understanding different ways that we can access and get at information, what different formats mean for our work, what some ideal formats are, less ideal formats, and how to really handle them so that we can get the most information for our effort. Obviously, the focus of this course is data journalism, and so one of the most important aspects of data journalism, or any journalism, is first identifying a story that is meaningful and compelling. For the basis of this module, we're going to be using primarily a data set that has been worked on recently by the New York World, and actually got an enormous amount of attention for good reason. And it was a series of stories and also an interactive based on a database of Department of Health violations in supermarkets around the city, going back as far as January 2008. This data was acquired by Patch through a Freedom of Information Act request. And so this is going to be the basis of much of our analysis over the course of the semester and kind of a starting point for your reporting process for looking at how these things relate to experiences that people have in neighborhoods around New York City. However, in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to, because we have this sort of found data source, this product of a FOIA request, for this first segment, what we're going to look at is how we might go about finding information on the web. Because the web is going to be, FOIA requests are obviously a great way to get data, really important way to get data, and we will hopefully discuss at some point sort of FOIA requests and how that works. But for the most part, a lot of your data sources are going to be online. And so for our exercises today, when we're looking at data formats and kind of exploring their various features and strengths and weaknesses, what we're going to do is look for some additional information that is related to these health inspections, but not the exact data set that we'll be looking at later on. And so because we're looking at food, over time, as you get deeper into this practice, you will find various places to locate data and information. One great resource for this is if you join the Investigative Reporters and Editors group, professional group. They have a set of databases or a directory of databases with some information about what those databases contain, which is extremely useful. Obviously, there's kind of the well-known databases, things like the census. A lot of NGOs collect and publish data and make it freely available on the web. Very often government sources, so large government agencies, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Reserve Economic Database. There's tons and tons of information types out there. And obviously there's an important consideration when you use a data source to make sure that it's something that you feel comfortable with. And we're going to be talking a lot about how sort of paralleling the experiences or the practices of data journalism and sort of more traditional journalism, because in reality, the exact same kinds of criteria that we use when we are when we're practicing traditional journalism have corollaries in the data journalism world, and it's probably the most kind of intuitive and constructive way to think about how we approach data journalism, which is really just another way of finding information, another way of reporting out your stories. So in this case, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at something called the New York City Data Mine. Now, this is a resource that was first published a couple of years ago, and to be perfectly honest with you, varies enormously in the quality of the data that's in here. And so the first rule of looking for information is to go to a source that you trust, or check out a source and make sure that it's one that you trust, i.e., that you think is going to provide high quality information, that it's reputable. And then on top of that, you really have to go and look at the data itself. One of the biggest challenges in working with data as a source is often the lack of metadata around it. while we will discuss ways in which we can interrogate or question data sets, they cannot answer unstructured questions for us the way that a person can, for example. And so very often we have to be a bit resourceful and sort of canny when we are trying to understand exactly what a data source contains, and essentially whether it meets our needs. And of course, whether it actually contains the information that we need is first, is the primary consideration when we are determining whether it's something that we use. So, we have this theme of looking at grocery store health violations, and so having come to the New York City data mine, I just to sort of reiterate what happened here, nyc.gov/datamine is a short URL for it. You can see here that it does a redirect to a website called data.cityofnewyork.us. And I think in an effort to kind of make things more browsable, they've done a classification of data sets into various subject areas. Department of Health obviously is going to sort of govern sanitation, things like that. You can see the restaurant inspection results list here, which is actually a fascinating and terrifying database of its own, or I should say data set of its own. But having come into health here, very first thing, I'm just going to do a sort of keyword search for food. And obviously and sort of see what comes up with that. Now, I see again my restaurant inspection results, WIC income, which is, I believe it's women, infants, and children, right? It's what was formerly known as welfare. Meals, income level, commissioner's regulations. So one at the bottom here looks kind of interesting and possibly relevant to our work, which is, of course, we know that grocery stores are being cited for health violations. It would be interesting to know what those regulations are that they're being cited under. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on this and just kind of point out some features. This is not a hugely atypical type of view to see with web-based data. What we're seeing essentially is a spreadsheet layout. That's a very common layout. We're going to see it in a lot of forms and formats. So this is a view to get comfortable with, columns and rows. And we have a little bit of information. We've got some tools up here. This interface actually is a version of one that is, I believe, still based on the commercial product known as Socrata, which is, which seems to have gained enormous popularity with governments who are looking to sort of do quote-unquote open data over the last few years. So there's a strong chance that you will encounter this particular interface again, and you'll get more familiar with it. So just want to sort of say here that as we're looking through this, there's not really a lot to this data set. I mean, we see there's a health code article number, a description, and a URL. And it looks like this is sort of covering basic things that we might be looking for, school-based programs, daycare services, I presume health regulations for daycare services, food prep and food establishments. This might be relevant for us. I don't know, rodents, insects. There's quite a few options in here, and a lot of this is going to. We don't know exactly what the value of this information is going to be, but it does point out that the very first step in doing data journalism and using a data source is just to look at it, right? To look at it in some organized form and say, what kind of information is in here? Health code, who knows what we might have thought this was. It turns out that, as I said, there's not really a lot here. It doesn't seem to have an enormous amount of detail. I think actually if we click on one of these links, we get, yes, this is kind of what I thought might be here. It's a PDF, right, which is basically a text file in a non-editable format. And so, the thing that can be difficult is, this is simply to emphasize that very often, it can be tempting to sort of say, oh, I found this data set, right? It's WIC income eligibility. Who knows what that data set contains until you kind of really take a look at it. And, this, again, I guess, it does contain WIC income eligibility, but an understanding of what that really means, you can't infer that until you've actually looked at the data. So I just want to use this as an example to talk about different data formats. So we've already encountered really two data formats. One is HTML here, and HTML is a really great data format for previewing data, for just looking at it, because the web is an interface that a lot of data is made accessible through. What we will notice too, though, is that let's say I wanted to get at this data, you know, I'm highlighting this. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do anything. I'm just going to open a text file here. Oops. Okay, if I just open a text file and kind of paste in. So I get kind of an ugly mess here when I do that. It looks like I've gotten some of the information, but not all of it. I've got a bunch of weird, funky artifacts. So, you know, if I wanted to save this data to reference for later, HTML is not going to be a great format for me, right? And I think most of us kind of know this, you know, on a basic level from browsing the web. But it's just to say that, you know, HTML, while good for looking at things, browsing through them, kind of getting the shape of them, I like to say, which is what I mean by that process of just seeing what information it contains, what are the columns, what are the rows, how much of it is there. All of that is okay for browsing in HTML, but when we want to actually do some analysis, we want to save a copy, obviously we're going to be looking for some different data formats. And in order to access those, we are going to choose here the export option. And what I actually really like about this export option, or what it illustrates really well, is just the actually really large variety of data formats that are out there, and that you know, one might be offered as an option for retrieving data. And these data formats have different strengths and weaknesses. We've already looked at PDF, right, which was actually sort of our data content. And one thing that we can say about it is that you know, it's good for preserving formatting. It is generally used for things like text and images, sort of document-based data. It is not very good for doing data analysis. It's actually really hard to get information out of a PDF. And actually large projects have been done to sort of extract information from PDFs, both using sort of human power and computing power because of that fact. It is not designed to be malleable and therefore can essentially resist analysis very effectively. But we do have all of these other different data formats, and we're not going to go into all of them in detail, but we are going to look at a handful of them that are very common and also very relevant to the kind of practice analysis we're going to be doing mostly. So first we're going to start with, I'm actually going to start with .xls, which you should be familiar by now, is a Microsoft Excel extension, file format. And just to sort of get a feel for this, I'm going to go ahead and click on this. I'm going to save this in my, in my data module flow. I already had a copy in there, but you know, shocker. And I'm just going to go ahead and take a quick look at this. Now, I'm going to use not actually Microsoft Office for this. I'm not going to use Excel. I'm using a program called LibreOffice. LibreOffice is an open source solution, and I like to do that because I think open source is important, and I will discuss why that is important at some point, but also because it's free. I do recommend that you make a donation of some kind anytime you're using open source projects or products, but you know, it's important to us because, of course, one of the things we want to do is be able to scale and continue our practice with the tools that we're familiar with. So using something like Excel, which has an expensive license, is not always an option, and there are a lot of good alternatives out there, like LibreOffice. So we can see when we look at this that this actually mirrors the, you know, our copy and paste effort from the web page didn't really yield much, but actually this Excel export mirrors pretty closely the row and column layout and information that we found with the HTML version. And so if our main interest was simply to maintain a reference to this, we could simply download it, save a copy, and that would be a good way to have it on hand and get back to it later. One thing that this doesn't provide, I will point out, is provenance. It doesn't tell us where this came from. So it would be on you to make sure that you keep a record of where that is. You could certainly take the URL here, copy it directly into your Excel file, right, as a reference. If you are, as you should be, keeping a process document, which I would just do as a as a text file, then you can do it there. But you always want to keep track of where you get your information from. So now we've downloaded this in Excel. Again, not very exciting, but we're going to use this as a basis for looking at some other file formats. So in the next episode, we will take a look at CSV, JSON, PDF, and a couple of others. See you in a few minutes.